Hey everybody, Kurt Rish here, and thanks for joining me on the One Shepherd YouTube channel where we support seekers and believers. So, as I'm sure you already realized, we're going to be talking about fruits of the Spirit today, and we're going to go ahead and dive right in. We're going to start out by looking at Matthew 7, verses 13 to 23. Just to give you a little background, chapter 7 is the last chapter of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And he's given a whole bunch of lessons on how to live a life that's pleasing to God. And in the tail end here of chapter 7, as Jesus wraps it up, he gives us a little bit of a warning. So let's go ahead and get started. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction. And there are many who enter through it. For the gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from the thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? So every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A tree cannot produce bad fruit, nor can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then, you will know them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name cast out demons? And in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. So Jesus starts out by giving us just a little warning to be careful, that it's not an easy path to follow him, and that most don't or won't follow him. But then he goes on to warn us about one of the biggest reasons why people fail to follow him, and that is false prophets. And if you notice, one of the interesting things here is I just did a lesson on spiritual gifts, and Jesus points out that uh, some of these false prophets will have what appear to be spiritual gifts. In fact, they say to him, but Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we cast out demons? Didn't we perform miracles? By all means, those are spiritual gifts. However, they're obviously not of the Holy Spirit. And Jesus says very clearly, away from me, I never knew you. So, when I was a young Christian, or a new Christian, which wasn't that long ago, um, I used to think when he talked here about the fruits, uh, you will know them by their fruits. Jesus often says that about, followers and believers. And I always thought it meant somebody coming to Christ. So, in other words, your fruits were leading people to Christ, or your fruits were your children if you were a parent and you raised them right. I never really fully understood it. So it's kind of, interesting. What are the fruits he's actually referring to? To get a better understanding, let's take a look at Galatians 5. This is Paul talking to the Galatians. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. Now those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also walk by the Spirit. Let us not become boastful, challenging one another, envying one another. So Paul starts out this by giving us 9 fruits of the Spirit. So let's go ahead. We'll take a look at each of those fruits of the Spirit and what they are, and then we'll talk a little bit more about this particular verse. So the first fruit of the Spirit he mentions is love. Now, if you happen to have studied any Greek or studied the New Testament, you know that the Greeks used multiple words for love, each with a little bit different meaning. The word that's used here is agape. And of course, agape means unconditional love, or love of affection and benevolence. So this is the greatest form of love. This is a love that comes without condition, or a love is of such high regard that you want to, help the person and be, in other words, benevolent. The second one here is joy, and the Greek word for that is Chara, and it simply means cheerful, that is a calm delight. So in other words, this isn't the joy of excitement that we think about when we think about happiness. This is a joy that's internal and is calm and is basically always there. The next of the fruits is peace, and I'm going to probably butcher the name here. The Greek is Eirene, or Eirene, I should say, and this means one peace or quietness / rest. So in other words, this is just very, again, that calmness, that peacefulness, that, I like the description, one piece. So everything's just of one and calmness. The next one, some people will translate it as patience. I use the word long suffering, which is, from what I can see, the best description. Long suffering in the Greek is Makrothumia, and it means, obviously patience or forbearance or fortitude. The fifth of the fruits of spirits is kindness, and this is Chrestotes, and this means a useful, that is moral excellence. So usefulness, that is moral excellence. So in other words, this goes beyond just, being nice. This is being kind and out of, essentially a greatness of morality and seeing each person as valuable, which of course, we were all created in the image of God. The next one is goodness, and that is Agathosune. And this, bear with me, guys, I'm butchering some of the Greek here. And this is a virtue of beneficence. So in other words, the virtue of being good, or the beneficial to people. The next one is faithfulness, which you actually would have heard me talk about in the spiritual gifts, because faith is a spiritual gift, and the Greek here is pistis, which means moral. It's a moral conviction of the truthfulness of God. The next one is humility, and this is Praotes, and this is meekness or gentleness, is another way to translate it. And the last one is self-control, and this is the Greek is Egkrateia. As you can tell, I'm not doing very good with the Greek words tonight. And another word for self-control would be temperance. So just kind of going back then, and looking at what Paul said, after he mentioned the fruits of the Spirit, he said, against such things there is no law. In other words, if we're walking in the fruits of the Spirit, there's no need for the law, because we're going to be living, a living example of the law. We, as he says, we've crucified the flesh. We're no longer living a life, practicing sin. We're living a life that's fruitful to God and pleasing to God. As he says, let us walk by the Spirit and live by the Spirit. So if we look at Matthew 12, verses 33 to 37, Jesus elaborates a little more on the fruits of the Spirit. Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak what is good? By the way, he's talking to the Pharisees right here. For the mouth speaks out that which fills the heart. The good man brings out of his good treasure what is good, and the evil man brings out of his evil treasure what is evil. But I tell you that every careless word that people speak, they shall give an accounting for it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. So here again, Jesus spells out that we're going to know them by their fruits. And in this case, he's specifically talking about the words they choose to speak, because the words that we speak come from our heart. So if somebody's obviously leading people astray, as Jesus says, that's his heart is evil and he's speaking evil. If somebody is serving and leading people to Christ and teaching people about Christ and the gospel, then obviously, we can recognize him by the fruits. The key is to be paying attention and know that gospel. So if we look at 1 Corinthians 13, and here's a perfect example. Paul actually talks about knowing them by their fruits, even when they demonstrate spiritual gifts. So let's look at this. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, but do not have love, it profits me nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, and is not jealous. Love does not brag and is not arrogant. Love does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. It is not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered, does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But if there are gifts of prophecy, they will be done away. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be done away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, that's Christ, the partial will be done away. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child. I think like a child, reason like a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I also have been fully known. But now faith, hope, love, abide these three, but the greatest of these is love. So in the beginning of this, Paul talks about having spiritual gifts. And what does it matter if you don't have love? In other words, if you don't have the fruits of the Spirit, what does it matter? The spiritual gifts mean nothing. The next part of this, he goes on to describe what love is and what love is not. And if you really sift through that, you'll recognize that what he's actually doing is describing each of the fruits of the Spirit. And then he just simply talks about the fact that the fruits of the Spirit, growing in the fruits of the Spirit, is a natural progression as we grow in our walk and we become mature Christians. And as we become mature Christians, we should show more of the fruits of the Spirit and less of our natural man or our fleshly desires. And then he simply points out that love is the greatest of all. So it's great to know what the fruits of the Spirit are. It's important to know how they relate to spiritual gifts. But what do we do with them? Why do we have them? Christ really answers this in John 13:34 to 35. And he says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." So we're to be an example. That's abundantly clear. And we're to live it so that men will see and know. And this is again reiterated in Matthew 5, verses 14 and 16. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Guys, so simply put, the fruits of the Spirit are given to us to support each other, to lead men to Christ by our example. Not our words necessarily, but by our example, how we live our life. Then our words will mean something too, because they're going to know us by our fruits. And that's gives us the best chance to lead them. Guys, thanks for joining me tonight. If you enjoyed this, please hit the like button. Be sure to share it out and hit that subscribe button down there. We don't want it to be red. It helps out the channel if you hit subscribe for me. Thanks and have a great evening, and God bless.